Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I am Bob Wexler, president of American Jewish University, and we're happy to see all of you here this evening for what we hope will be a very, very interesting program. This program is sponsored by a new institute here at the American Jewish University, the Institute on American Jewish-Israeli Relations, which exists to explore the understanding and sometimes lack of understanding between American Jews and Israeli Jews specifically. And that will be the topic of our evening tonight. You know, it was billed as Brothers and Strangers. Now, I'd like you to imagine that you are looking at a screen on your computer, and you are connected to the internet, to a site, and you're watching a video that was sent to you or prepared by the Misrad HaKlita, the Ministry of Absorption in Israel. Now, their role, of course, is to welcome new immigrants, but also one of their goals is to return to Israel Israelis who have left. And so imagine that you are now watching one of the internet ads that appeared earlier this year. And in this internet ad, you are watching in turn a Saba and Savta, a grandma and grandpa, clearly sitting in their apartment in Tel Aviv. And on the rear mantle is a Chanukiah, so you know that the time of year is Hanukkah. And on the other side of the Skype that they're talking to their son and daughter-in-law and their little granddaughter, Mayale. So the Saba and Savta are smiling, and they exchange a few pleasantries. And at one point, the Savta, the grandma, says to little Mayale, Mayale, in Hebrew, of course, but she says, "Tell me, what's the next holiday?" And she says, the next holiday, Savta, it's Christmas. And then you get the banner which says, in Hebrew, that they will always be Israelis, meaning the parents, what will happen to her, and then it says, help them come home. And there was a whole series of ads. There was another ad that depicted a young man, clearly not Jewish, coming home either to his wife or girlfriend, we don't know, to a darkened apartment only lit by candles. And he says, oh, honey, I guess I'm in for a romantic evening. And of course, what was she doing? She was sitting in front of the computer screen. It was Yom HaZikaron in Israel Memorial Day for the fallen soldiers. And she was commemorating it by candlelight. And then again, you have on the screen, she will always be an Israeli, help her come home. So you understand, from the perspective of the Misrad HaKlita, the Absorption Ministry, they were doing what they thought would really touch Israelis to heart. And we have Gadi Levy standing over there, who is the head of our WISN program, who is himself an Israeli, who told me, right, that it was very touching. You know, these ads, it made him think. And he's moving back, but not because of, I don't think only because of the ads. But I heard that from other Israelis too. It really spoke to them. Well, on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean, in the United States, many leaders of the American Jewish community were outraged by these ads. And why were they outraged? Because they said, well, the clear message that you're trying to convey to Israelis living in the United States is that you can't be Jewish living in the United States, and if you raise your kids here, they're not going to know it's Hanukkah, they're going to think it's Christmas. So here you have an American Jewish sensitivity to the fact that we feel we have a very full and rich Jewish life here, and you have an Israeli concern about trying to bring back Israeli citizens and using the internet in the best way that they know how. Two communities connected by accident of birth, or however you want to define it, by accident of peoplehood, not understanding each other. And that really is what we're going to be speaking about tonight. I would like to very briefly introduce you to each of the panelists, and I will be moderating the discussion. To my far right, and he couldn't be more inappropriately placed, is an old friend, J.J. Goldberg, the former editor of the Jewish Daily Forward. He's a national columnist, and I believe now responsible for the editorial page. Is that right? Or no, not just write the column. Okay. At the Jewish Journal, and has the other distinction that from forwards, and has the other distinction that from 1982 to 83, or was it 83 to 84? 83, 84, spent a year working at the University of Judaism before we were American Jewish University. Clearly, it was the pivotal experience that launched him on his career of success as a journalist. Next to JJ is Gil Ribak. Gil is a new addition to the staff and faculty of the American Jewish University. He is the director of the institute that I just mentioned, brand new, first director ever of the Institute on American Jewish-Israeli Relations, and he is an assistant professor of Jewish and Israeli studies here at the American Jewish University. Next to him is a name that will be familiar to anybody who reads the Jewish Journal every single week, and that is, of course, Shmuel Rosner, columnist. Apparently they have newspapers in Israel also, and Shmuel writes for one of them. It's called Haaretz, you might have heard of it. But we also have the pleasure of reading him every week in the Jewish Journal. He is also a fellow at the Jewish People's Policy Institute, which I believe, Shmuel, that's governmental backed, right? It's
no, it's independent. It's funded partially by the Jewish Agency.
Oh, partially by the Jewish Agency. Okay. And last but certainly not least, to my immediate right is Bethamie Horowitz, who is research assistant professor at New York University, NYU, in the area of education and Jewish studies. So we're very pleased to have the panelists with us, and without further ado, we are going to get into the meat of it. The format for this evening is, as moderator, I will be posing some questions to them, giving certainly each of them a chance to respond, also a chance for them to discuss it with each other. If our dinner before this event was any indication, it will be a very heated discussion. But I will make sure to leave time at the end for your questions, and we will probably wrap up the program no later than about 9:15. So I always feel it's fair to tell people how long it's going to last, and then they know, and they don't. There's no spilkas going on. Okay. Right, and we also have to end because you have to be able to get onto back onto the freeway and across the bridge for those of you who live in the valley. So we understand. Okay.
Is it close? Is it close?
Not till 10 o'clock. You will not be trapped here for the rest of your life. All right. So I want to remind all of you of an event that occurred last month, really only about 3 or 4 weeks ago. And that was on October 13th, Anat Hoffman, who you know is the chairwoman of the Neshot HaKotel, of the Women of the Wall, was arrested, and the charge was disturbing the peace because she was wearing a talit and vocally intoning the Shema Yisrael prayer at the Western Wall. She was handcuffed and she was led away to prison. Rabbi Rick Jacobs, who is the head of the Union of Reform Judaism, that's the umbrella organization, of course, of all the Reform congregations really in the world, said the following: North American Jews don't see an Israel that reflects their core values. So my first question is, this is what Rabbi Jacobs said. Is he providing an accurate reflection of the views of North American Jews? Is he only speaking for Jewish leaders? Because sometimes we are concerned, is it only the leadership we hear from? And to what extent are most American Jews even aware of this whole issue of pluralism in Israel? So again, is he reflecting a widely held view? Are American Jews aware of this? And again, is he only speaking for the leadership? Bethamie, do you mind starting?
I don't mind starting. It's a complicated thing because we don't have the best ways to know about the opinions and beliefs and knowledge base of American Jews. I don't want to get into the whole thing about it, but as I'm mentioning this, we have a number of surveys that are ongoing. The main one is the American Jewish Committee's regular survey, but it's very limited in what it asks. That said, I think from my travels around the American Jewish community, and you didn't give I've been studying American Jews for much of my career, and I think it is the case that American Jews really take the baseline of democracy and freedom of expression and the kinds of things we have in America and we cherish. I think it's kind of like an assumption that that's what a civil society ought to be about. And when we see something going on in Israel like what happened, it's very disturbing. I don't mean that people aren't able to make a translation that Israel has come from a different base, whatever, but I think it's basically disturbing to American Jews who see that, and the ones who might not be as disturbed by it or not disturbed at all are people who spend a lot of time in Israel, who are very connected to Israel, and maybe I don't know, actually I won't speak for that. I'm very connected to Israel, I spent a lot of time there, and I know I'm disturbed by it. So what I'm trying to say is, I don't have data about what American Jews think about it. Actually, there may be something, but
So you're saying that in the absence of data, it's not okay to express an opinion?
Well, I'm a social
Because,
scientist.
that
so
goes
now
against, that
I'm
goes
a-
against a Jewish...
I'm a social scientist, and when you ask the question the way you did, you're asking me for an
Okay.
evidence-based
Okay.
view,
Good. No,
and
I'm
I'm
glad.
trying to tell you, A, I don't have evidence, but B, I don't have survey evidence, which would be one form of evidence. I have other forms of evidence which are based on knowing American Jews, going around talking to
Right.
them,
But
and
not-
whatever.
not formal.
But I don't have hard data that I can say a survey was done at X point and people feel upset.
No, I get it. I'm just, I'm just very impressed that a Jewish person would be willing, to say that I don't have an opinion because I don't know the facts.
That's
But-
why I moved to the university,
exactly.
and I'm not any longer based in the Jewish organizational world.
But I knew eventually I would meet somebody like that, so...
Yeah, okay.
Shmuel, I don't know whether, because you're really in a position, in a sense, to answer it from both sides of the... So I'd like to throw into the mix, also, whether it goes the other way, which is, do Israelis care about this, issue? You can answer either about Americans, what you've observed traveling around, or what you know as an Israeli and an observer of Israeli society.
Well, I can give a very long answer to this question because really to discuss the matter of the Western Wall, mixed davening at the Western Wall, you have to know a lot of facts. One of them being that Anat Hoffman actually broke the law when she put a talit on at the Western Wall. Now, you might not like the law, but it's not even the law. It's a decision made by Israel's Supreme Court a number of years ago, and this decision was supposed to put an end to the bickering over the Western Wall, because what the Supreme Court actually said is, near the Western Wall, everybody has to go by the Jewish custom of many thousands of years, and we are going to let those who do not want to follow this minhag, this custom, can daven someplace else near the southern wall, where they made a special place for mixed tefillot near the kotel. So she was intentionally provoking. I'm not saying she was not right to do it. I'm very sympathetic to her goal, but people need to know that she was intentionally provoking the police, and that she was, I suspect that she was somewhat pleased with the results, in the sense that this is a way for her to carry her message around the world, especially to American Jews. What she wants to do, she wants to have impact on Israeli policy by way of raging American Jews against the current policies of Israel. Now, as I said, I'm very sympathetic to her goal. I think it would be great to have three rachavot, three places for tefillah near the kotel, one for men, one for women, and one for both. However, as one considers the current policy of the Israeli government, one has to ask himself, what would happen had we established such third place near the Western Wall? And I'll tell you what happened. The next day, you'll have 100 or 200,000 ultra-Orthodox Jerusalemites protesting, demonstrating, throwing stones at police officers, blocking the streets of Jerusalem. It will be a huge problem for the Israeli police to have to deal with. What happens if there is no such third Rachava near the Kotel? You have to arrest one person every once in a while. Now, if you are the chief of police, what would you do? That's my answer.
You would arrest Anat Hoffman because it's easier. Gil.
As a follow-up to what Shmuel said, you know that every 3 Jews have at least 5 opinions, and that's on a good day. I would start off by saying that it shows you, I wanted, by the way, this event to be called Israelis are from Mars, American Jews are from Venus, but they didn't let me. It was too cute. But I think we do have cultural differences here. When secular Jews look at the American response to the Anat Hoffman case, they really don't understand the outrage. They say, are we going to fight over that? We would like to fight in order to have buses on Saturdays. We would like to fight in order to have shopping malls open on Saturday. We would like to be able in Jerusalem to go to the theater on a Friday evening. We would like to actually have the state draft Haredim, ultra-Orthodox. Anat Hoffman, or what the reform movement conceives to be a very important issue, is maybe 9, 10, 11 on the secular Israeli agenda. And you have to fight the battles that you can win. You have to fight the battles that you see as much more important to you. For most secular Israelis, and that's, whether you like it or not, they would be sympathetic to Anat Hoffman. But in terms of political cachet, in terms of the political capital that you have to invest, they will invest in things that are much more important to their daily lives. So for the once a year, twice a year, you go into the Kotel, to the Wailing Wall, and you have to separate from your wife, and you have to pray in two different gathering places? No. But if you cannot take a bus on Saturday, and you don't have a car, that might be more of a problem. So keep in mind, the Israeli secular point of view seeks different fights because for the secular public in Israel, it has much bigger fish to fry.
JJ?
First of all, I want to say I'm very pleased to be back here. It is a little disappointing because when I worked here, I was involved in recruitment and admissions. And when people came and they didn't have the grades to get into the University of Judaism, I'd say apply to Judaism State University, which is... But I want to, first of all, a couple of facts and then a little bit of analysis. Facts. Anat Hoffman was arrested last weekend. I think it was yesterday or today, 6 more were arrested. It is apparently an ongoing campaign. 6 more women in talitot.
Wearing talitot.
In talesim, as we would say in America, as in English. The arrest of Anat Hoffman came during a tefillah of a convention of Hadassah in Jerusalem. So that she brought a group of Hadassah women who were delegates to a convention to the Kotel and then proceeded to organize a tefillah and put on a talis, knowing that she would be arrested and knowing that she had the best possible audience to bring the message home. So, yes, there is a level of intentional provocation. I would remind you that that's what Martin Luther King used to do, get himself arrested because he knew people would be outraged. Is there any comparison between what Martin Luther King was fighting against and what Anat Hoffman is? I wouldn't suggest that, but you can make your own judgment.
As the only woman on the dais, I would say that it matters, but it may not matter as much as certain other things, but it's...
There is an outrage among non-Orthodox religious Jewish women that most Israelis don't understand because most Israelis don't understand non-Orthodox religious. If you're not Orthodox, you're not religious. And therefore, the idea that I feel I am equal before God and have a right to stand before this holy place along with the rest of the house of Israel is lost both on the Orthodox and on the non-Orthodox in Israel. Now, if you go a little deeper, give me a second here. In 1987, the Lubavitcher movement pressured the Israeli Orthodox political parties into pushing for a change in the law of return, so that one would be Jewish if one was born to a Jewish mother or converted according to halakha, because they wanted to disallow converts in reform ceremonies from coming and enjoying. There had been one case. There's not that many reform converts who want to move to Israel. It's become a much more serious issue because of the mass immigration of Russian Jews, many of whom don't have Jewish mothers. But the Reform Rabbinate in America, that Rosh Hashanah, organized a high holiday campaign. They all across America, with probably hundreds of thousands of Jews in synagogue for the one time per year, they were given sermons about what the Israeli government was doing to reform Judaism. And they were telling their congregants accurately that in the eyes of the Israeli government, Reform Judaism is not Judaism. Now, there's a logic to it if you're Orthodox. Orthodoxy is essentially the assertion that Judaism is observance of the mitzvot. Reform Judaism says Judaism is, the mitzvot are voluntary. They're guidelines in life. And therefore, if you believe that the mitzvot are the law is the essence of Judaism, then you have to believe that telling people mitzvot are not obligatory is not Judaism. there's a psychological factor that played into this. For most American Jews, Judaism is what you think. It's how you feel. It's things you do from time to time. There are things you can do in America which you can't do in Israel, which is to be more Jewish this year than you were last year. Or not so Jewish this year. In Israel, you're Jewish, you're not Jewish. We can be more Jewish. I have a friend who's a lot more Jewish than I am. There's no such thing in Israel. You're Jewish or you're not Jewish. And so when they heard that their Judaism wasn't regarded as Judaism, they heard they were not regarded as Jews. And that causes outrage. And that has continued to echo. And it's reinforced periodically by people who have something to say. But it's translated in the American Jewish mind, outside of a fairly small circle of observant Jews, as Israel tells you you're not Jewish. So that is a constantly echoing outrage. And add to that one last point. This I was shocked to hear, but I've now heard it many times from Reform Jews. I am Jewish. I follow Jewish values, beginning with democracy and equality. It is taught in Hebrew schools. Judaism begins with a belief in democracy, equality, and tolerance. That would be news to a lot of Israelis. Not that they necessarily don't believe in those things, but they don't connect the two. The idea that, and so that adds a level of value-based outrage when they hear about this, and they do hear about it. The New York Times reports on it, and the American Jewish Committee has asked in the past, how do you feel about Orthodox Jews?
No,
Generally pretty positive. How do you feel about Orthodox Jews in Israel? Very negative. In other words, there is a specific animus towards Orthodox Jews in Israel among a broad sector of American Jews, and it stems from what they read in the newspapers.
Gil, Shmuel, you want to say
Yeah, I
something?
want to. JJ mentioned the Who is a Jew legislation of the mid-'80s, but there was another attempt to do a similar thing just 2 years ago, the so-called Rotem bill, named after Knesset member David Rotem of the Israel Beitenu party. In both cases, it is worth mentioning that in both cases, the law did not pass. Now, it did not pass because there are times in which the Israeli government or an Israeli prime minister, a responsible Israeli prime minister, understands that Israel cannot go too far in alienating the American Jewish community. The Israeli government and the Israeli public, they do understand that the partnership and the good relations that they have with the American Jewish community, and there aren't many other Jewish communities around the world. Let's face it, 85% or so of the Jewish people today live either in Israel or in North America. So the relations between these two communities are important to the Israeli government, and both in the mid-'80s and again 2 years ago, and 2 years ago I was following it very closely when Prime Minister Netanyahu realized that he had a serious crisis because of this Rotem bill, he just freezed it. He called Knesset member Rotem and told him, I cannot let this pass. I'm sending it to a committee, and you know what happens to legislation when it is sent to committees.
It's important, though, to note that when the Rotem bill came up, there was very little response from America. Many people have moved on. They're not following that news so much anymore. However, in 1988, a year after
it was more of a
Prime
public
Minister Shamir, there was an election. It was a dead heat between Labor and Likud. And Shamir, Yitzhak Shamir, head of the Likud, signed a coalition agreement with the Orthodox parties to form a government which included a commitment to change the law of return. It happened in November. It happened to be the day that the General Assembly of Jewish Federations was convening in New Orleans. And Shoshana Cardin, who was the president of the Council of Jewish Federations, got up and called on everybody to head for the airport. 3,000 Jews took planes to Jerusalem, and Hadassah organized, and the United Synagogue organized.
Did they fly a Lal at least? No, I'm just...
They flooded the Knesset, and Shamir was essentially forced to tear up the agreement with the Orthodox parties and go back into a very uncomfortable unity government with Labor because of the protests organized. And they literally, thousands of Jews flew to Israel to protest. It was the only time that American Jews brought down an Israeli government.
Gillen, along with the notions of understanding one another, one of the impressions that a lot of us have is that Israelis tend to think, even secular Israelis to a certain extent, that the only legitimate expression of Judaism is orthodoxy, whether or not they choose to practice it. And so I'm curious about whether you think that that is a fair generalization or not. And connected with that, to what extent do Israelis have any sense at all of what American denominations are, all about? So how do they view orthodoxy in terms of legitimacy, and do they have any sense of the American way that we look at religion?
Let me start with the first part, of course. The way Israelis, secular Israelis view Judaism and orthodoxy is that's true Judaism is actually an Eastern European heritage. An Eastern European heritage that many of the grandparents or great-grandparents of people who are sitting in this very room would have agreed with. If you take a look at Yiddish-speaking immigrants in America when they just came, and I'm talking about people who were socialists or anarchists or communists, they said, bury me, but just bury me in an Orthodox funeral, because I don't want, any of those reform ones. I don't believe them. So that's something of an attitude that Israel simply keeps. It keeps something of the Jew, because Israel basically is, let's face it, it is some kind of a Jewish shtetl, not necessarily a Yiddish-speaking Jewish shtetl, except for some of the Haredim, but it's sometimes run as a Jewish shtetl. But this idea that Orthodox Judaism is the only historically, culturally viable way, and that secular will get it, that's something that was brought over. And as I said, in America, it was also brought over by some of your great-grandparents. About Israelis don't understanding Jewish denominationalism, that's part of Jewish secularism, and that was part of Zionism, the idea that you could be Jewish without practicing. And I think there is a lot of misconceptions about the other branches of Judaism in America besides Orthodoxy. There is not enough knowledge about the processes of renewal and regeneration that American Jews have undergone, at least in the last 2 or 3 decades. But that has to do with the fact that how Israelis view abroad. There is the Gola and there is Chul. Gola, I would say maybe, or Galut, that's exile, that's bad. You study about that in high school. Chul, abroad, yeah, you go, you have a good time. America and Israelis, secular Israelis oscillate between seeing America as a Galut or seeing America as Chul, as abroad. And it has to do with lack of knowledge, I think, and lack of awareness to those processes of renewal and regeneration.
Bethamie, do you have that same impression that Israelis are sort of either or when it comes to religion? Or do you think it's more complex?
I think actually my impression is that there is this basic assumption that that religion in its true form
Is orthodox.
but I think there's been in the past 15 years there's been a real development of sort of a greater awareness through Elul, through all these other things
Alma,
that were, Alma, all these organizations that were developed by Israelis for Israelis to get secular Israelis to connect to the Jewish bookshelf and to have some sense of their own heritage and not be alienated from it, and they've been quite successful. So I think on that score, I think that may be changing. You're also not speaking at all about the Sephardic. You're giving an Ashkenazi-centric view, and I don't know what Sephardim think. I mean, but their form of practice hasn't been as driven by strict halacha. It has also a cultural. It's got a different. It seems to me a different flavor than this kind of. So I don't want to speak about what do Israelis think about orthodoxy as much as I actually think that there is a lot of need for translation. You asked, the second part of your question was what? Was about.
Do they really understand what movements
So
are
I'd
here
like
and
to
how they
speak about
function?
that part because number one, I think many of us have been asked to explain American Jewry to Israelis. I know I've been invited a number of times. When I lived in Israel, as I'm a person here who knows about American Jewry, I've been asked to explain to different groups to sort of give them a primer about how should they think about American Jews. And it's kind of interesting to do that enterprise. And then the other datum I have is that I studied, I followed a group of visiting artists, Israeli artists who were resident in, the Schusterman Foundation has a program that brought artists, they still do it, they bring artists to live in different Jewish communities around the country for 2 to 4 months at a time. And at the beginning of that project, I was interested in learning about the artists and how what their experience was. How did they process this? What did they come thinking about American Jewry, and then what did they take in based on their experience there? And the striking thing was how much people felt that they had never understood about the role of the synagogue and the way that it creates community. I mean, I had one woman who lived in Iowa City. The artist came to Iowa City. That's where the writers' conference is at University of Iowa. She was a poet. She was a surrealist poet. And there was a surrealist archive. There is a surrealist archive in Iowa City, and she was in Yehupitz, basically. And yet part of her job.
The whole city is a surrealist archive, I think, isn't it?
Well, the thing that was interesting, she came because a guy who's not Jewish, who runs the archive, knew about her, and he wanted her there. She wanted to be there. She didn't think about the Jewish piece. But part of her job through this program was to actually also go to local synagogues, whatever, to be involved with Hillel. So there maybe were 5,000 Jews in the area where she was. But she went around to a radius of 300 miles, and she found it amazing what holds Jews together in a place where there isn't a government, where isn't a Jewish government, where there isn't Jewish society. She found it extremely moving. And what I found interesting, and I watched this, the people that were based in cities didn't have that reaction, but particularly in the smaller towns where there aren't a lot of Jews, and she saw the kind of way that she was brought in and people valued her. I mean, she found it to be quite moving, and I thought it was an interesting window into something that, it gave me insight into this kind of like, we American Jews are so focused on Israel a lot of the times, we don't even pay attention to what our strengths are. And I think we haven't gotten to this point in our conversation. I don't know if you're going here, but I'm going to put this on the table. I think that one of the things, I'm going like this with my hands, a former dancer, because what I'm trying to illustrate is that we've had American Jews in Israel, 64 years ago, there wasn't in Israel. And American Jewry has changed hugely in 64 years, and we've gotten a lot more confidence as a very accomplished people in this country. I mean, you have Madeleine Albright not being afraid to realize that she had Jewish relatives. You got Jon Stewart every night saying something about being Jewish. I'm not saying these are paragons of Judaism, but the comfort level with being Jewish and our sort of being really positively viewed in America, being an accomplished group, being admired, is something that's really changed. And over the same period of time, 64 years, Israel's grown into its own place. But our sense of what makes Israel and American Jews connect has been, we are one, we are one. Well, I'm arguing at this point that in many ways we ought to pay attention to how we're different, how we each have different social organization, cultural things going on, and we're like good cousins. You said brothers or strangers is the title. I think there's a lot of range in between brothers and strangers. And we're cousins, we're related, but we're not in the same household. And we will come together when there's terrible things going on, but we have good things to appreciate in each other. So I'd like to put that out, because
We'll
I think
move on
that
to a little bit.
underlies,
If I may just say something about the Mizrahi experience, just very shortly.
Yeah.
Explain what you mean by that.
The non-Ashkenazi, because Sephardi is a misnomer. Mizrahi, or Oriental Jews, is a little bit more accurate. Asher Arian, the late Asher Arian from Tel Aviv University, did a huge study back in 2009. It's called The Portrait of Israeli Jews. And he found out that actually among Mizrahim, among non-Ashkenazi Israelis, the lower your level of education is, and the more Mizrahi you tend to be rather than Ashkenazi, you tend to see Orthodoxy as the only legitimate and viable way, and plus the fact that you think that all the other branches of Judaism and what ensues will not be able to ensure Jewish continuity. So actually, I would say Mizrahim in that regard might be a little bit.
So let me turn to Shmuel a little bit on that subject. Shmuel, the American Jewish community has poured a lot of money into the reform movement in Israel and conservative movement in Israel. It's been there for quite a while.
Not a lot, not enough.
Well, not enough. Okay.
No, not nearly enough.
All right, but let me ask you.
I'm saying this. I'm not trying to provoke you. I'm saying it seriously. If the American reform movement and conservative movement are concerned about the future of their movements in Israel, they should be putting much more effort in establishing more communities, in helping these small movements grow in Israel. They just sitting here and saying, well, what they're doing in Israel is not good enough. That's nice.
Although,
but-
if I can stop, because I wasn't exactly going there, though that's
Okay.
interesting, because I wanted to ask you a different kind of a question. You know, when Bethamie was talking about how Israeli secularists approach it, you said nothing about reform or conservative. You named indigenous Israeli efforts to deal with this whole issue of the Orthodox, non-Orthodox spectrum. You talk about something like Alma or these other organizations. These are not things that originated in the diaspora. These are things that originated there. And you didn't name any. I'm just noticing what you said. So my question to you was not so much.
Although there certainly are Israeli Reform congregations that have been growing.
Right,
I mean,
but the question I wanted to ask
didn't
Shmuel is
mention them, but yes, you're right.
you know, the most recently native Israeli, having been there 3 weeks ago, was, what I wanted to ask you was, from the perspective of American Jews, money has been spent. Whether it's enough or not, I want to leave that aside just for the moment. What I want to ask is, have there been any fruits of this effort? In other words, do you think that the reform movement and the conservative movement have traction among Israeli Jews, or is it a matter of little significance?
Okay, this question is for me a very personal question, because
Okay.
my wife is just about to end her tenure, 5-year tenure as the CEO of the Reform, the Tel Aviv branch of the Reform movement, so-called Tel Aviv, Daniel Centers in Tel Aviv. Yeah, so
But I know
she's
you can overcome your
I didn't know
personal.
that.
okay.
That's
She was running
By
the.
me, that's yichus.
My wife is, of course, a yichus. So she was running the reform movement in Tel Aviv, and the simple answer to your question is yes, they are making inroads in some ways, in some places. There are more people coming in. If you go to this synagogue, Beit Daniel, every Shabbat they have 3 bar mitzvahs lined one after the other. They do like 500 or 600 bar mitzvahs every year. They're teaching in different schools, but that's Tel Aviv. Okay, that's
Northern Tel Aviv.
that's the state of Tel Aviv. And the state of Tel Aviv is different from the state of Jerusalem, and even more different than the state of Beersheba. So are they making inroads? The answer is yes, but mostly in places where you find people that are more secular, well-educated, well-to-do, more Ashkenazi than Sephardic. In such places, they are making inroads, and I think that if they adopt the right approach, which I'm not sure is necessarily the combative approach of Anat Hoffman, the Western Wall. For too many years, the reform movement was trying to change Israeli society by way of forcing upon it Supreme Court decisions. You cannot change a society by legal appeals. You can get some sort of achievements, legal achievements, by doing so. But if you want to change the whole society, you have to go slowly and gradually and do it through education, through work within the community. And in some places, they are pretty successful in getting things done. Now, what does it mean successful? There is still a huge difference between the level of commitment that that Orthodox Israelis have to their lives as practicing Jews, and the level of identification of secular Jews who belong to a Reform synagogue in their city to their practice of Judaism. These will go to synagogue every Shabbat, and the others will go to synagogue twice a year. These will be willing to demonstrate, again, possible violations of what they think is sacred, and the others might just say, well, it's not cool, it's not okay, but other than that, I'm not sure they'll be willing to sacrifice and go to a lot of trouble in order to change Israeli reality. Gil was right in the sense that he said that for secular Israelis, there are many things they would like to change about the way state and religion relations in Israel are being handled. It is not always the priorities of the reform movement. We have a problem with the rabbinate, with the Orthodox rabbinate. We have problem with conversions. We have some problems now within the military with Orthodox soldiers that are refusing to hear female soldiers singing.
Or
We
serve
have-
next to them. Or
Yeah,
even
we have all kinds of problems that are more urgent to most Israelis than the very specific problems in which the reform movement is interested. So I think setting the right priorities and working through education and community work instead of pursuing the legal channel to every problem will in fact enable the reform movement and the conservative movement to make even more inroads in Israel.
JJ, the impression that I have, and it's somewhat changing, is there hasn't been a lot of emphasis, research emphasis over the time on figuring out what Israelis think about American Jews. Most of our focus for a long time has been what we think about Israelis and not the other way. But there have been some changes. I want to mention one and get your reaction to it. So the Ruderman Foundation, as you know, in Boston, has devoted now some energy to this issue, and they're beginning to do some survey work on this. And in their most recent, I think it was in 2011, they found, I'm looking here to want to make sure that I say it exactly. It was reported that 87% of Israelis responded to this survey that they consider the American Jewish community to be either quite important or even very important to Israel's security and political existence. Now, a somewhat different question, but I think reinforcing this, was asked the year before by the B'nai B'rith in a poll. And they didn't ask about specifically American Jews, they asked about diaspora Jews. And they asked Israelis on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the highest, to rank how close they felt or how important they thought diaspora Jews were. 80% of them gave it an 8, 9, or a 10. You're an American Jew. Does that comport with what you experience when you go to Israel and speak to Israelis? Do you get the sense of this overwhelming connection and sense of our importance?
There is a very schizophrenic view of Jews in America. We keep Israel safe. We have enormous influence in Washington. There's a wildly exaggerated sense of how connected we are in Washington, how much influence we have, and how much American Jews care. They think that we're all going to rise up and keep them safe. And on the other hand, they think we're all disappearing. You remember when that survey came out that 52% of American Jews who get married every year marry non-Jews. Now, they took the number back. It was wrong, but the Israelis haven't heard about that. Israelis love that number because it shows that they made the right choice and we made the wrong choice. But there has been testimony in the Knesset, which I've seen on tape, that you need to understand that 52% of American Jews assimilate every year. What the hell does that mean? 52% of American Jews, we'd be gone by now. There'd be 3 of us. The idea that 52% of the Jews who marry this year marry non-Jews, and we still don't know how many of them will raise Jewish children because it's a lot more than we think. Israelis don't get that. Israelis are completely schizophrenic. The biggest problem is, in a real way, and I think it's been alluded to here, they don't care. It's not part of their life. And if you confront an Israeli, especially an Israeli leader, Israeli education, they don't teach about life in the diaspora. They don't have graduate departments about life in the diaspora. They don't give degrees about life in the diaspora. I was at a dinner once, the United Israel Appeal, which was part of the UJA, Alav Shalom, brought over a group of mid-level Jewish agency employees, the people who spend their money in Israel, to see American Jewry for 10 days. They were living with families. And they invited me to the closing dinner, and I was sitting with a guy with black suit, white shirt, black yarmulke, who works in the accounting department in the Beersheba office of the Jewish Agency Settlement Department. I said, "What did you think?" He says, "I went to shul, and I could sit next to my wife. It was incredible. I didn't know you could do that." His eyes were shining. Another observation, I've started to notice over the last 10 or 15 years, because I mean, I write about this a lot, I speak about it, I go around Israel speaking about it. There's a sizable constituency now of shlichim, you know, the Israelis who come here to teach and work in youth groups and summer camps, and low-level diplomats, not the ambassadors because they don't mingle, but the consuls, the assistant consuls for cultural affairs and academic affairs. There's now thousands of them who have been here for 3 to 5 years, seen what American Jewry is, that it's not this cartoon of people disappearing, assimilating every year, eating pork, encouraging their children to marry goyim and celebrate Christmas. They see it. And there's now thousands of them who've become essentially a lobby. They're pushing for university courses. They're pushing for it to be taught in high school. They're talking to their friends. I mean, by the way, Reform Judaism is not a mass movement in Israel, but there is a growing percentage of Israelis who want a Reform rabbi to marry them, even though it won't be legal. And there's a lively business now among Reform rabbis, not so much conservative rabbis, because the conservative rabbis in Israel are essentially Orthodox except for mixed seating. But the Reform movement is really doing well in presenting itself, and there are Israelis, people I meet and people I read about and people who tell me about their friends, who want something more. They want a connection to God, and they're not going to go to an Orthodox synagogue.
Okay, so let me just do the focus on one, but in the high numbers that these two polls came up with, when you talk about the schizophrenia, which part of the schizophrenia gives them the high numbers? Why are they answering that way?
They're answering that way for two reasons. One is because they know that the Jews in the diaspora are about to get killed because there's Nazis everywhere, and it's their job to save them, to send the Air Force to bring them back, and they're ready for
the airlift.
Yeah, they did it in Ethiopia. They did it in Russia. After the Ethiopian, there was the airlift. They brought 25,000 Jews in 24 hours.
Right.
In 1991.
And so what are the reasons for that?
I was writing for the Jerusalem Report at the time. They wanted me to do a story about when will the mass aliyah from America begin. And I didn't know how to begin. I mean, I finally got a good start because I won't even go into
Okay.
that.
So you said there's another thing.
It's the part about caring about the diaspora as being the Jews in trouble that they save.
Right.
It's the part about seeing American Jews as this powerful lobby that can wrap the White House around its fingers and send them lots of weapons and money. And it's the schizophrenia that they'll be there, they'll take care of us, but they're disappearing. But they're also very important and very strong.
Shmuel, I'm sure you have something to say about this poll.
Well, I think both polls that you mentioned, if I'll be blunt here, are just lousy polls. If you write the question in a manner that there is no other answer but yes, then you'll get the yes. Mm-hmm. Are they important to you? Yes, of course they are. Now let's see how do you translate such importance into action. Mm-hmm. Are they important enough for you to change your policies on state and religion? No, they aren't. Are they important enough for you to give them somewhere to pray near the Kotel? No. Are they important enough for you to not to consider a change in the law of, in the definition of who is a Jew in the conversion legislation? Not necessarily. So again, just giving this generic answer of yes, we consider them to be very important.
Wait, but
will not
to
get us
inject
very
here.
far.
I mean, I hate to inject an optimistic note, but even the sense you said, well, of course they're going to say it's important because of the way that it. But doesn't that imply a sense of connection?
Look, I'm very optimistic.
Emotion?
I'm not a pessimist. I'm probably the head of the lobby that JJ was speaking about. I've been spending my
By the way,
time.
you got voted out while you were here.
Yeah.
That's it.
I'll get back. I'll
He's
make
the
sure
deputy
to reassert my seniority in this lobby. in the last couple of years, I spent a lot of time speaking to Israelis about American Judaism. I wrote a book about American Judaism aimed at Israelis. I wrote a book in Hebrew. The Israelis are the people who are reading it. I'm invited to speak in many places on this issue. And I think that there is some sense of a beginning of an understanding in Israel that American Judaism is not the caricature that old Zionism was trying to portray. Now, this whole conversation about Israelis is problematic. There is no such thing as Israelis. There are Israelis of many different communities. With some of them, there is no way to make any inroads, and there is no way of having a real dialogue about diaspora Judaism or about American Judaism. And with some of them, it is fairly easy. American Judaism have huge impact on Israelis even without them noticing it. The fact that you can go now in Jerusalem to at least 3 modern, liberal, Orthodox synagogues with either mixed sittings or egalitarian way of davening, that's American influence. All these synagogues were established, at least partially, by American-born Israelis. And my brother is a member of one of them. He's not American-born. He joined one of them because he likes the way they do things. Now, he doesn't have to know that what he does in his daily life as a practicing Jerusalemite Jew is originated in America, in New York or other places. Right. But there are many ways in which American Judaism have influence on Israelis. Obviously, there are ways in which Israel have impact on American Judaism. These relations are much more nuanced and complicated than we tend to than the way we tend to portray them as. The people come and go. JJ was right to mention the thousands of Israelis that went on different missions to the United States, and many of them are going back with different views of that's how I started. I started my professional career as the ambassador of American Judaism in Israel when I was 25-year-old shaliach to a very small Canadian community for a year. This was my first mifgash, my first encounter with North American Judaism, and it changed me. It changed me, it changed my wife, it changed the way we practice Judaism, it changed the way we educate our children, and it changed the way we speak to our community about Jews around the world.
If I may throw something what JJ said, there is a need in Israel to reaffirm the Israeli way of life. Life there is quite intense. It's not maybe the most convenient or comfortable life that you can think of. So, for example, when Arutz 2, channel number 2 in Israel, ran a story about intermarriage among American Jews, it began with the following portrayal, and it was a very mathematical portrayal. 1948, you had 4.5 million Jews in America, 650,000 Jews in the Yishuv, in Palestine, when Israel was established. 2011, the United States has between 5.2 to 6 million Jews. Israel has more than 6 million Jews. Now think about that. Of course, they're doing that in order, first of all, for rating. There's no question. But second of all, it's very important, and I think it's kind of a reaffirmation process or circle that is going on in Israeli society since the beginning of Israel. The fact that you call people who leave Israel Yordim, those who descend, as opposed to those who are olim, those who ascend, of course, is part of that. And you have to keep reaffirming why it's important to live in Israel. And as Shmuel said, Israel is also the Israeli or Jewish public in Israel is changing demographically. You have more people who are non-Ashkenazi, you have more Orthodox, you have many more ultra-Orthodox. Their relationship, their understanding of American Judaism is very different. You thought that negation of the diaspora, negation of life in the diaspora died with David Ben-Gurion? Well, guess what? Now you'll have Shas, you'll have Eli Yishai. Their communities will have a very different negation of the diaspora. And I think communal activists should take that into consideration. Israeli society is changing as we speak. It's a living organism, and it will have different views of the diaspora.
JJ?
Speaking of Shas, I was on a plane once to Israel.
Were we speaking of Shas?
Do we have to?
I was on a plane to Israel, and when the sun came up, a bunch of Jews went to the back of the plane to put on the tefillin. And one of them was a woman who's a professor at the Jewish Theological Seminary, and she put on her tallis and she put on her tefillin. And this was before Anna Hoffman. This is probably 15 or 20 years ago. And these two Shas guys with the big black hats and the heavy Moroccan accents, one of them goes back to go to the bathroom. He comes rushing up to his friend. I just saw the funniest thing. I saw this woman putting on tefillin. The other way, that's so funny. My God. He says, but you know what? She had real kavanah. She was devout. She was, and something that moment changed him. Mm-hmm. And I don't expect, in other words, all of the encounters change people. But I want to tell a midrash that the smartest thing I ever heard about Israeli diaspora relations, and I don't want to leave here without relating it, a guy named Aryeh Carmon, he was a professor of Holocaust studies at Beersheba University before it got named Ben Gurion. I met him when he was
He's the head of the Democracy Institute in
Yeah.
I met him when he was a professor at, a visiting professor of Holocaust studies at UCLA. And then he went back and started an Israel Diaspora Institute.
Democracy.
Israel Diaspora Institute, and it didn't gain traction. So he gave up. Because an Israel Diaspora Institute in 1985 or 1990 had no market in Israel. So he changed it to the Israel Democracy Institute, and now he talks about things like how the Knesset gets elected and stuff, and he doesn't talk about the diaspora because there's no market for it. But he told me at UCLA that American Jews and Israeli Jews are both offshoots of a great Jewish community that is no more. They were experiments in 1880. Hundreds of thousands of Jews left Russia for America. Tens of thousands left Russia for Eretz Yisrael. The Judaism that was created in America took half of the European Jewish experience. European Judaism was something you were, something you did, a language you spoke, the street you lived on, the newspaper you read, and the things you believed, and the things that you chose to do every day in order to show your devotion to God. Sometimes more devotedly, sometimes more absent-mindedly. So it was a combination of day-to-day life and belief and choice. In America, we created a Judaism that is all about choice. It's the things you do. That's why you can be less Jewish and more Jewish. In Israel, they created a Judaism that, except for the later aliyah of Orthodox Jews, we're talking about the non-Orthodox Jews, is about everyday life. You ride in a Jewish bus. You read a Jewish newspaper, you serve in a Jewish army, you speak a Jewish language, you get Shavuos off. That's what Shavuot, and that's what being Jewish is. And to the Israeli mind, there's a certain level of, if you don't go to, what does it mean to be a Jew in Cleveland? You don't ride a Jewish bus, you don't speak a Jewish language. How can you possibly be Jewish if you're not Orthodox? And that's the thing that's slowly changing. The problem is, if we had grown up in the shadow of the mothership, for another 200 years, we probably would have evolved into some sort of unified worldwide entity different from what had been before, impacted by the two societies we'd settled in and created. But we lost our mother. And we were raised as two orphans raised in different homes who know that they're related, have no understanding, and each of us thinks that we are the true descendant of the mother and have no clue about what the others are about. People get up in my lectures and they say, now I don't understand. If 20% of Israelis are Orthodox, so the other 80% are Reform and Conservative, why do they let this stuff happen? They don't get it. And Israelis don't understand what it means to be a Jew in Cleveland or Skokie. So that we totally experience Judaism as something completely different, and due to historical circumstances, we've been
Right.
I
Well, actually,
only
I'm
just,
sorry,
I
go ahead.
disagree with one piece of that. I certainly agree that we have different experiences, but I can hardly believe that we would be the same if the quote-unquote mothership still existed. I just, would be three different experiences.
Maybe.
I'm very much a social scientist who believes that the local, the context is what shapes us, even though we have the horizontal influence of our context and we have the vertical influence of our history, which we have a shared history, but we don't have a shared contemporary experience. And the more contact now, the better. And, so I agree with you about that piece, but not about, I think you're creating a sort of a fantasy image of nostalgia about the mother that we're orphaned from. I think that's a little over
Well, that was the
top.
literary flourish.
I
that's
know,
okay.
but I'm.
Well, he was just quoting something.
Were
It's
you,
not him.
I thought that was
He
you.
can still distance himself from
Well,
it.
I disagree with Aryeh Carmon, and you're, you're wonderful.
I can argue with you, but I won't.
Right. One thing, and then I want to go on to another
I
more
missed
controversial issue, but one of the things that I think may actually strengthen the argument that you just made, JJ, is that we all know that there is, of all the Jewish communities, the American Orthodoxy and Israeli Orthodoxy are very tight.
Mm-hmm.
They probably have more in common than, they definitely have more in common than secular American
Mm-hmm.
Jews have with secular Israelis. And it sort of fits into what you're saying
Those are the
because.
three Jewish peoples.
Well, they're also, they're
Americans,
more.
Israelis, and Orthodox.
Well, and they probably moved the least away from what, the original, the Judaism was that they had in at least from the Ashkenazi community. Sephardic community is something else. Because you see that it's in terms of the number of connections there are and the way that when you look at what happens when Israelis come to the United States, Israeli Orthodox who come here very quickly find their way into the Jewish community. They immediately go to a synagogue and they're there in the connection. If you're a secular Israeli, it's harder. You're more likely to stick with Israelis and probably, and at least for one generation, and then the
But
kids.
once they have kids, Israelis who live in
They
this
assimilate
country
very quickly.
realize that in order to continue sort of they realize the importance of Jewish community and
Well, and their kids become Americans very quickly, so we see that. And then they have to deal with that because when we look, for instance, by comparison, let's say with the Persian community here, where there seems to be a much stronger cultural hold that Persians have over the children and more acceptance of staying within, the parameter. When I look, and I've had occasion to teach Israelis and also Russians and watch their kids, it seems like the assimilation to being American is much faster. And that creates more that sense of vulnerability and the recognition that you just pointed out, which is, if I want my kids to be Jewish, I have to do something about it. I can't just, just let it sit.
There's one thing that's been throughout our conversation, if I can just point out.
Sure.
Some people on this panel keep talking about American Jews as we talk about denominationalism, but then the conversation becomes Orthodox or secular.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact is, the Reform and conservative denominations may be secular sometimes in practice, but there's ideology and content to the denominations that aren't the Orthodox denominations as well. And I think it's you said it and you said it just now, and I just feel it needs to be sort of put out there that each of the denominations was founded with an ideology behind it, a worldview about how to be Jewish in the world. And it's not that one does the stuff and the other one doesn't, that the Orthodox do everything, that everybody else does nothing.
Right.
And I just
No, of course, I
want
don't
to
think.
correct that. I'm sure everybody in this audience knows that as well, but I think the way we talk about things ends up sometimes leading us in directions that are
I think
farther afield.
Yeah, I think it's only because we're trying to use two vocabularies for two different societies and make it
Correct.
work. And so it doesn't always work.
Right.
Gil, a subject that I know you have strong opinions about. So in 2007, Stephen Cohen, well-known Jewish sociologist, and Ari Kelman wrote a study called Beyond Distancing, where they looked at how young American Jews, the younger generation, felt toward Israel. And their conclusion was, which I think they probably demonstrated well, although I'm interested in hearing, that that there is a correlation between age and connection to Israel, people who are older being more connected, people who are younger being less connected. But what has happened since that study was people's attempt to try to understand why that's happening. And one of the most notable, famous, notorious, depending on which position you are, is that of Peter Beinart, who I know you told me to call him Beinart, but it's
That's
kind
what
of
he
hard for me
says,
to,
I didn't
that's what he says. Well, he doesn't know how to pronounce his name. So,
He doesn't know anything.
so he attracted a lot of attention by asserting that, yes, there's distancing, and he gave a cause. And he said the cause is it's alienation. It's alienation that they're feeling towards Israel because they are not comfortable with positions that Israel takes, policy decisions that Israel makes, actions that Israel makes. So let me ask you on two levels. First of all, do you agree with the findings of Cohen and Kelman that, in fact, younger Jews are distancing themselves for Israel? And is that the general trend? Is it more nuanced than what they said? Is there something, what's going on there? And if you do accept it, then do you accept, well, since I'm talking to you, I'll call him Boehnhardt's position that it really, it comes from political and considerations of policy?
Let's just to clarify, when the Cohen and Kelman study came out in 2007, they did not actually refer to Israeli policies or to the Israeli-Palestinian or Israeli-Arab conflict at all. They simply said younger Jews tend to be more distant or more alienated from Israel for a host of reasons. One of the main reasons, according to them, not according to Peter Boehnhardt, was intermarriage. They simply said among young American Jews, you have more people, many more people who are the offspring of mixed marriages, and those people tend to be much more distanced or alienated from Israel, regardless of Israeli policies. That was, and I think it's a very solid, it's a very interesting study. There was a following.
I will take up that point.
Yeah.
I just want to give you a headline.
No, sure.
And heads up.
No, there was Theodore Sassoon and Sachs who said, well, you know what, it has to do also with the fact whether they're married or not. Once they get married, if they're married to a Jewish spouse and they have kids, then you start seeing reversal of that process. They become closer to Israel because that's part of their Jewish identity and Jewish education. Now, Peter Boehnhardt kind of threw a monkey wrench into that whole discussion because he said, well, you know what, if young Jews are alienated from Israel, it has to do with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I had the honor, I guess, to be with him in the same panel a year ago in Arizona, where someone from the audience asked him a very simple question and he couldn't answer that. And I think it was the Shaliach even. He said, Mr. Boehnhardt, thank you for your talk, very interesting. How come Jewish liberals don't support Israel as liberals? Forget even as Jews, as liberals. As people who know that if you live between Morocco in the west to Iran in the east, between Syria in the north to Yemen in the south, with all those 22, 24 liberal democracies that surround Israel, if you're a gay person, if you're a woman, if you are a member of a religious minority, your best bet is in Israel. And we know that because we have, for example, Palestinian gays trying to move into Israel because they'll be killed in the Palestinian Authority, in which, by the way, if you murder a female member of your family because she violated an honor code, you get not more than 6 months in prison, which, by the way, based on the
And you're saying
Jordan.
they're not advanced?
You see? And that's based on the Jordanian law of the moderate Jordan. And that person asked Peter Boehnhardt, wait a minute, don't defend us as Jews, defend us as liberals. As the most liberal, as a country, by the way, which is, and Shmuel and I were talking about that yesterday, a country which is in many ways still much more liberal than this country in terms of abortion, in terms of mandatory health insurance, many other things, in terms of a network of solidarity. And I think what Peter Boehnhardt did to the whole discussion, he was covered in the Israeli media, I mean, far and out. The Israeli media loves Peter Boehnhardt because he epitomized for them, he symbolizes this alienated lefty. They say, you see, that's what happens to American Jews. Not only that they are assimilated, they're also leftist. And I think he simply took the whole discussion and derailed it. Because I really don't think that for most American Jews, they care how many roadblocks Israel has between Hawara and Hebron. It really, they don't even know where those places are. And if Israel is going to risk its own, security situation, I don't think that American Jews will have a better, relation to it. Jonathan Sarna, by the way, a very good American Jewish historian, saw that between 1948 and 1967, when Israel was not an occupier, when there were no territories, American Jews had much less connection to Israel than after 1967, when they wanted, to bask in its own glory, the glory of the great victory. So I don't think it has anything to do with the Israel-Arab conflict, but it does have to do, I think, as Kelman and Cohen were saying, it has to do with intermarriage.
JJ, same question. First of all, would you, whatever that means to validate, would you agree with the findings of Cohen and Kelman, and if you
Let
do,
me just barge in. I shared a panel with Stephen Cohen just 2 days ago, and I must say Stephen Cohen himself doesn't agree with his past findings of 2007.
There's a new study
Not the
that
first
just-
time.
I don't think relying on this 2007 study by Cohen and Kelman, it was an important study because it started a new debate within the Jewish community surrounding, related to the relations between American Jews and Israel. But Stephen Cohen today, or just
2 days ago.
we were on the same panel Tuesday morning. Stephen Cohen said this: there is a competition, basically, between two trends within American society. One, travel to Israel, which increases the connection between young American Jews and Israel. That's mainly birthright, but also programs like Masa. And the other trend is intermarriage. And this goes back to his 2007 study. He says there is a competition between travel to Israel and intermarriage, which will get the better side of the American Jewish society. And there are signs that travel to Israel is slightly ahead. This is Stephen Cohen's words. He just 2 or 3 months ago
did a study
in
which he found out that it was a brand new study of American Jews. You segment them ages 65 and above, 55 to 65, 45 to 55, 35 to 45, and under 35. Now, up until recently, the last time they did this in the 90s and the early 2000s, it was a steady decline, and it happened often enough to support the idea that it's not stage of life. It is how far you are from immigration, how far you are from the Lower East Side in Boyle Heights, and how far do you have first cousins in Israel or fifth cousins in Israel. However, in this new study that they just did, which was a shock to Stephen Cohen because it turned what he said upside down, he finds that it's 65 and above, 55, 45, 35, and under 35 goes way up. And he's calling it the birthright bump because he doesn't have enough evidence yet, but there is no other explanation that the under 35s are more identified with Israel, feel closer to Israel, and care more about it than the 45 to 55. At the same time, and this is Peter Beinart's mistake, because Stephen was very, when Peter came out with the book, Stephen, he's wrong about that. He's right that there's distance. It has nothing to do with how Jewish you are. The more you care about Judaism, the more you care about Israel. But what's happening now is, according to this survey, and it's one survey, there's a bump up in caring about Israel, feelings of attachment to Israel, saying that Israel is important to you as a Jew, but a continued decline in trust in the Israeli government's belief in peace. So that there's a generation, and a lot of it, hundreds of thousands of people have been on birthright, and they all have friends, and they influence each other. By the way, Kevin Youkilis played first base for the Boston Red Sox. Now he's playing, what, third base or outfield for the Chicago White Sox. A conservative Jew. He never got any attention for it, but he's never played on Yom Kippur or Rosh Hashanah.
Oh, he's gotten attention for it. My kid knows that.
Okay, but everybody goes Sean Green, everybody goes Hank Greenberg. But but Kevin Youkilis is serious about it, and you talk to Ian Kinsler or Brad Osmus or Ryan Braun, whose father is Israeli and mother is Catholic, and they will say, yeah, Youkilis goes to us and he says, be more Jewish. It makes kids feel good. It builds up your fan base. And you will find that it'll make you feel better. And they go to synagogues, they speak in Hebrew schools, they speak at UJA functions, because Youkilis talked them into it. Half Jews, all of them. Osmus is now, what is in Israel this summer, building the Israeli team for the World Baseball Classics. His father is Jewish. And he's now very wrapped up in building baseball in Israel. That's what he does. And Gwyneth Paltrow, whose father is a descendant of rabbis, her mother is a shiksa from Shiksaville, and she's got a food blog, and every spring she goes through her favorite kosher LePesach recipes and what the guests at your Seder will love for dessert. She doesn't advertise it, it's on her blog. If you're interested in food and you read her blog, you find out what's a good kosher LePesach sponge cake. and how to make it little. There's something going on among, and now finally
But what does that have to do with Israel?
what does that have to do with
Can you have a
Israel?
sponge cake which is
The half-Jews,
No, I'm with you. I think it's very simple.
the generation that goes back up is strikingly more half-Jewish than the generation before. In other words, the Jews who are 35 to 45 are less involved in Israel and more likely to have two Jewish parents. And among the generation of under 35s, you've got a population that's already very substantially half-Jewish. It's interesting that they answered yes when you call up and say, can I talk to you? I'm doing a survey. Are you Jewish? And they feel strongly about Israel. They feel more strongly about Israel than the 35s or the 45 to 55.
I just want to toss in
Bethamie,
one
please, go
additional
ahead.
thing, which is, first of all, the American, not American Jewish, but American attitudes about Israel have been very steady over a very, very long time. So if you're talking about American Jewish attitudes being lower than that, I don't buy it. So in that context, it's just important to sort of add in that American Jews are very much part of America, and American, whatever cross pressures there are about not unhappiness with settlement policies and whatever, and those are real, it's not eroding the poll level support for Israel.
And by the way, the ones who are going around saying Israel is an occupier, boycott the settlements, boycott Israel, they're very wrapped up in Israel.
Yeah, that's,
It's a
the argument here is that Peter Beinart actually undermines his own
That's a great
theory.
point.
Because since he started writing about Israel and talking constantly about how bad Israel is, he's been to Israel more times than ever before. He's speaking to Israelis all the time. He's being interviewed by Israeli newspapers and by American newspapers about Israel. He became more involved with Israel really than ever before. I never doubted, and I don't doubt now, Peter's commitment and devotion to the Jewish people and to Israel.
By the way, he's Orthodox and goes to
Yes,
school every
yeah.
week.
And his kids go to the Heschel School in New York.
And one of the things he didn't understand, he didn't realize that criticism of Israel, of Israeli policies, doesn't necessarily translate into alienation from Israel as such, or translates into distancing from Israel. The whole issue of, he was trying, again, I'll have to be blunt about this, he was trying to use the argument of distancing by way of trying to make Israel change its policies. Now, this cannot work because Israel will not change its policies, not even if American Jews aren't happy with them. Israelis, they have their own opinions about the way things should be handled in their territory. And secondly, because it is just not true. There was never any proof of distancing. And this is the interesting fact is that both the Stephen Cohen, Ari Kelman camp and the camp of researchers from Brandeis University who argued that there is no distancing, both camps agreed on one thing. If there is any sign of distancing, it is not because of Israeli politics.
Okay.
So this whole theory just doesn't hold.
Bethamie, I'll give you the last word on this topic if you want to, because you didn't really
No,
have...
I think we should
You're,
move on.
you're good?
Can I say one more thing?
Okay.
Can I say one more thing about this?
Well, what's the
I'll be
next
short.
question? Let's see what the...
Since
You have to be short, but you should
We
be
have to
brief.
give up something. so-
Since the Iraq War, the idea that Israel and its lobby in America are bad for America has become a mainstream idea. It used to be anti-Semitic to say the Jewish community is bad for America. Now, you got Professor Mearsheimer, who's the head of foreign policy at University of Chicago, who's got a six-figure book, and it's a bestseller, and you've got Jimmy Carter. Something has changed in America in the discussion of Israel and its friends here. And all of the Brad Osmuses and Ian Kinslers and Ryan Bruns and Gwyneth Paltrows that I'm talking about, today they choose to be Jewish because it's cool. If this continues for 20 years, I don't know whether the negative image of Israel will just make people want to not criticize, but back away. They don't want to be identified with something that's so disliked.
All right, well, that's a good segue into the next, and I'll make this the last
don't know.
question, and then we'll go to questions from the floor. And I hate to quote a poll that Shmuel thinks was not a good poll, but, what can I do?
Maybe this one.
Maybe you like
it's
this
the
one.
same one?
Yeah, but it's a different question, so maybe you like the question
No,
better.
no, the
Like
poll-
Valenza,
base of the
right?
poll is wrong.
I always
All right,
quote Lech Walesa, he's a good poll.
Which one?
Lech Walesa.
But we can discuss the issue even if you don't like the numbers. So how's that? So this was, again, the B'nai B'rith poll this was from 2008. And they said that a large majority of Israelis, over about 75%, expressed their opinion that diaspora Jews, or the opinions of diaspora Jews, should not be considered when deciding the final settlement of Israeli borders. So it's, again, 75% of Israeli Jews saying, we're not really interested in what American Jews have to say about the final borders. However, in that same survey, which I don't know whether it's a contradiction or not, 54% of them said that American Jews should not publicly criticize Israel, but 40% said it was okay for diaspora Jews to criticize Israel. So the Jewish logic of this is that it's okay to criticize Israel, but we're not going to listen to you if you do. I mean, that's kind of what I got from this thing, but I'm not sure. So whoever wants to weigh in first, please. go ahead.
I'll give you some facts that might explain some of these findings.
Okay.
To understand this poll, you really need to go into the cross
Cross-tabs?
tabulations of the answers. Because what you really get here is a left-wing secular Israelis that are frustrated with their governments, and they will say, yes, criticize us. And we might even listen to you. If you do, because they want the policy of their own government.
You're saying it's self-serving, basically.
The majority of Israelis who vote for their government, the government in Israel is democratically elected. It's a chaotic process, but we do have a democracy. And the majority of Israelis actually hold the perfectly sensible position that on matters of war and peace, they are the ones to make the decisions.
But what about the notion of criticizing those? So if I understood what you just said, you said that this is the way I would interpret what you just said, that those who say, criticize, they're self-serving. In other words, they are saying that because they feel that it strengthens their position. But fundamentally, if it weren't that case, they wouldn't be so open to. So are you saying?
I don't know many people who like to be criticized.
No,
It's not a.
Right. Well, but
Doesn't-
Shmuel, but it's a deeper issue than that. The question is, Israel holds itself. Maybe I should have given this as a preamble, but Israel holds itself out as the center of Jewish life. That's the understanding. There are arguments. American Jews don't always like that, but fundamentally, that's the argument. So then the question becomes, if I'm supposed to have some sense of connection, loyalty, whatever, doesn't that mean that I get to say something or that it's okay if I criticize publicly? Because if you tell me I have no connection, fine, so I have no connection. If you tell me I have a connection, doesn't that mean that I can criticize publicly?
This really goes back to the what JJ said earlier, and rightly so, about the schizophrenic approach of Israelis to American Jews. Yes, we want your support. No, we do not want your criticism. Now, again, this.
It's also, we need your
Wait a minute,
love.
you said, so it's like children and parents, basically. That's what my kids always say. Yes, I want your support, but no, I don't want your criticism. So-
Yes, you have a stake
Yeah.
in this great Jewish enterprise of building the Jewish state, which means you can give us financial support, political support, you can rally for us, you can come to visit. And no, it doesn't give you any right as to what policies we might pursue. Now, is it a very? It's human nature. We want your love and support. We don't want your criticism.
Bethamie, do you have the same sense of this?
I'll tell you where I'm coming at it. I think that I don't see any contradiction between wanting support and also, I don't see any problem with the polls, with the fact that there's a lot of interest in having support for American Jewry, and there's still a substantial minority that feels that criticism is okay, and a substantial minority, majority that views it as un-okay. What I think is interesting is still this issue that we're separate. In other words, you're saying still it's parent or child. That's still putting it in a hierarchy. And I'm interested in how we're actually, American Jewry is a very powerful, in a very powerful condition compared to any other diaspora that's ever existed. It's never been like this before, where we're not under threat. We're able to live very comfortably in a multicultural society. It's sort of an incredibly important paradigm to have for American Jewry, to have that in our panoply. Going back to your triad, JJ, of the mothership from Europe, that was a really negative experience for Jews. Even when even if you take out the Holocaust, it was not easy for Jews to be expressive in those places. And here in America, we can live as part of the society and have our Jewish lives in a very expressive way, and have other people admire us. And just parenthetically, there's the General Social Survey that's done every year out of Chicago. And they have data about how Americans view other groups. I mean, various groups, not other groups outside of America, how they view different subgroups within America. And so Americans as a whole are asked in this survey, here are some different groups. How much has each of these groups contributed to America? So the highest rated group was the English, people, Americans of English descent, and the second highest group is Jews. So it's really powerful. Most of us think, oh, I mean, at least I'm 57. My generation and older thinks, still has a little anxiety about how lovable we are in the larger America. I am now convinced, maybe I watch Jon Stewart too much, I mean, and I listen to my kids, it's really very different now. It's so comfortable. So what we're having in terms of going back to the hierarchy or the parity here is the idea that Israel's the only place you can be Jewish and do it well, I think is facing a contrast in this generation and in our experience of how it is to be Jewish in America, in the multicultural world where people can get along, and in Israel where one gets to live a Jewish life in Israel, but it's also got some costs. And I'm not saying one is better, one is not better. I think we have a big difference here, and we should come to appreciate what's great about each and what's problematic about each. The intermarriage stuff, all those different things that Israelis think about and that American Jews think about are real things. The problem of potentially being a garrison state is a real problem. The diversity or lack of it in Israel. I mean, we all. I think the more we and the we is the more that Israeli Jews can know about America, or Israelis, Jews and non-Jews in Israel can know about American Jews, and America would be a good thing. And the more American Jews and Americans can know about Israel would be a good thing, but they're separate. The assumption that we're the one and the same, I think, is really an old school thing, and it's holding us back from having a healthier relationship. It's sort of, no, because it's like in families. If you're over-identified, you can't see you in relation to the other.
So, and later you're going to explain to me what the English could have possibly contributed to American society that was better than what we did.
The Magna Carta, I mean, those.
No, I understand. So you have the Constitution, Declaration of Independence, and then you have the pastrami
It's not
sandwich.
the cuisine.
I don't think it's really, it's not really much competition.
What have the Romans ever done for Judea? Do you ever
Yes,
see
yes,
that?
Right.
But
So, JJ, because I do want to wrap up this part so we can still have a few minutes for questions. Basically, to JJ and Gil, the same thing. And if you have nothing else to contribute, then it hasn't already been said. Then say it again anyway. The same notion of public criticism, how Israelis feel about Americans criticizing. What insights do you want to give us?
I understand how Israelis feel, and a lot of it has to do with being surrounded by people who want to kill you. And you need somebody who's there for you, who loves you. Mm-hmm. And it's a very deep psychological thing. On the other hand, and at this end, especially in the older generation, we feel that way. Huh?
Yeah,
That's what
the evangelicals.
They don't love you in the same way. They love you so that Jesus will come back and kill you.
they'll deny it. But
They'll deny it. I find it increasingly weird that we are encouraged as Jews to criticize the hell out of Russia, to criticize France, to criticize Syria, to criticize England, to criticize Spain, but don't touch the country you care most about.
Yeah.
Don't have an opinion about the thing you love. Only criticize things you don't care about.
JJ, but you understand. I mean, it gets back to the family analogy. that's common in every family. I mean, there are things, I mean, my family runs that way. There are things that stay within a family and criticism that you're perfectly comfortable with within the family, but you don't want it. So don't you think that's what you're hearing?
If we knew Hebrew or we still spoke Yiddish, we could criticize them within the family. We have no way of speaking to each other except in English. And that's a real problem. We can only talk in English and everybody else hears us. It doesn't work anymore. The other thing is, they're the ones on the front lines. They get killed, we don't. Unless we work in the Federation in Seattle, or stand online at the El Al desk at LAX, or stand on a tourist on the 84th floor of the Empire State Building, or on the Brooklyn Bridge. I could go on. American Jews do pay a price. Now, they like to call it a hate crime, but there is a growing number of terrorist attacks by Muslims in America against Jews because we celebrate the fact that we are Israel's second line of defense. And they go, okay, you know, if we're willing to kill a bunch of kids in a pizzeria who didn't do anything to us, we're certainly willing to kill a bunch of people who go out in the streets and demonstrate and pressure Congress. And the death toll, it's not like Israel, it's not even close to Israel, but it exists. You have to go through barriers to get into my kid's day school on the Upper West Side. There are armed guards in the door of every shul in New York. It's a cost. And there are many other places in New York that are not Jewish that have armed guards and barriers because Arab terrorism exists, and people look at us.
Right.
And they go, what the hell are you doing to us?
Okay. As director of our new institute, Gil, I'll give you the last word, and then please, but make it short because we want to.
I will make it short. First of all, I think you still have much more chances of being killed on the Interstate 405 than being killed because of a Jew due to Islamic terrorism, just in terms of probability. But I think that the family metaphor is very important. Every family has kind of a black sheep. You have kind of a weird cousin who shows up only for, certain weddings. The family really doesn't like him. Why did you invite Jeremy? Well, we don't want to see him here. But it does show up. But then why is it this weird cousin? And what would happen if that weird cousin only comes to rub it in for you? If you're that weird cousin and you are only criticizing us and you're only, attacking us, but you don't show up in Sderot, for example, when it's being bombed, as we speak, basically, then probably your criticism will not be taken very lightly or will not be taken at all. Now, I think it's a red herring, this whole question of criticizing Israel. Israelis criticize themselves usually 3 times a day. Really, it's more than prayer. And I think you can criticize Israel. The only question, they need to know where you're coming from. If you're like Peter Beinart making a career out of attacking Israel, then yeah, it will be taken with a grain of salt, if not with all the salt shaker, and rightly so. If the people who criticize Israel will show love and support in other cases, without withholding their critique, I think we'll get a much better form of communication.
Thank you very much. All right, we have a few minutes left. Gentleman here, please.
You spoke about the under 35 in America and their views and how they had towards Israel. What about the youth in Israel and their views toward America, and also internally in terms of this, the way the government responds to the Orthodox religion?
I'll give you a very short answer. The under 35 in Israel just don't think too much about America. It's not something they are preoccupied with in any sort of way, except for those, and these are hundreds, if not thousands, who do go on different missions to be counselors in youth camps, or the many Israelis that are now part of the Taglit project. I just
Birthright.
Birthright Taglit project. I just spent the last 2 months assisting the Birthright administration to build or to restructure the program for Israelis before they go on Birthright trips. These Israelis are changed by the program because they go on the bus with these young American Jews and they spend a whole week with them and they teach them a lot, but they also learn a lot. And I'm fairly optimistic. I think Israeli society is gradually changing towards more understanding of American Jewish realities.
Elmeda?
My question is to JJ. You mentioned that the Orthodox in Israel don't see the Reform, and in my opinion, conservative too, they don't know the difference. They don't see them as Jewish. And that is because they choose, they don't practice everything, and so on. But is that really the reason? The Israeli seculars practice even less. Don't you think that the reason is more like they look at them as maybe contaminated, they're not purely Jewish, and that's why they don't accept them as Jewish?
I did say that American Jews are under the misimpression that Israeli Orthodox don't consider them Jewish if they don't practice Orthodox Judaism. And in fact, what what Orthodox Jews in America and Israel say is if you practice a Judaism that isn't resting on obligatory halakha is not Judaism. It's not that you're not Jewish. It's that the religion you practice isn't Judaism. The rabbi who converts you is not really a rabbi because he wasn't ordained by an Orthodox rabbi, he didn't receive the Torah from Moses, and he doesn't adjudicate Orthodox halakha. So if you were converted by a rabbi who's not Orthodox, you weren't converted because he is not a rabbi, and therefore you're not Jewish, the convert. But the Jew who was born Jewish and goes to a Reform temple instead of an Orthodox synagogue is a Jew who went into the wrong synagogue, that's all. That's all they say. But they don't recognize those synagogues as synagogues.
Yes, in the back.
Just to bounce off that point very quickly, go back to another point that JJ made prior, I think when halakha, you're a Jew no matter what.
Right.
If you're an atheist, you can't escape it, you're stuck. Right? Born a Jew is a Jew. You can convert to Islam, you're still a Jew.
Yeah, but that's only if you were born to a Jewish mother.
Right. I mean, yes, this is true. But on slightly tangential note, more related to my generation as an undergraduate, based on what JJ said about the relationship between, so looking at the next 10, 20 years of how Americans and American Jews will look at it, it's kind of cool to be Jewish. You have like Jewish festivals, whatever, Gwyneth Paltrow's kind of coming out of the closet a little bit as a Jew, you know. But there is a very concerning movement happening on university campuses nationwide. It's the legitimization of Israel. And today, the protest at UC Irvine just passed a 16-0, rule statement to boycott.
Disinvesting from the companies that trade with Israel.
Divestment from Israel.
So the question?
And you see this, I mean, I'm not a religious person, I'm not, as many would categorize, you know, the religious right, crazy, whatnot. But it seems to me that, you know, the more radically left you go on university campuses, especially such as UC Berkeley, UC Irvine, you see progressively more delegitimization, more divestment, more. There seems to be a common thread in very radically left environments.
But
such as
can I,
UC
do you
Berkeley.
have a question? Because I want to do
Yes,
this
so
for
the
questions.
question is,
Don't you agree?
what is your view of the future? My apologies. Your future for Americans and American Jews and their view of Israel. If this persists, if this kind of delegitimization, this divestment persists, do you think there's what does the future look to you? How do you see it? What do you know about it? What do you think?
All right, so how do you see, how is all of these trends going to affect the relationship and?
Well, as I said before, I worry that if this continues, this hostility toward Israel and the demonization, among I would say a growing sector of American intelligentsia, and it's in the media now, it's in magazines and in newspapers, which it didn't used to be. People are going to want to back away. People are going to want to go, me? I'm not Jewish. And if you, pardon?
Again,
I worry about this.
Okay,
I
but
mean, before '67, the U.S. wasn't so strongly in favor in supporting Israel like it does post, like it post '67 and today. And that sort of seemed to be the popular political thing to do. And we sort of just stayed on that course. But if society unravels or the delegitimization divestment continues, do you think that will potentially jeopardize political relationship between the U.S.? And this is the future. This is the future.
okay, can I suggest, because that sort of goes a little out of the range of the, I'd like to focus on the questions more about the relation. We have time for a couple more questions. In the back, gentleman with the glasses.
Thank you.
I want to reverse, in a sense, this issue of criticism of Israel by asking the following. When President Obama made a number of statements which caused Jews here in the United States to be somewhat upset. I'm wondering if Israelis had any reactions to those types of statements. Were they critical of the president?
President Obama is the least favorable president among Israelis for many years. His approval numbers in Israel, not that Israelis vote for him or for American politicians, but his approval ratings in Israel are very low since almost the beginning of his first term. He is considered by a majority of Israelis to be either pro-Palestinian or neutral on Israel, as opposed to pro-Israel, which is the position most Israelis would like an American president to hold. And this hurt Israeli, in the diplomatic relations between Israel and the United States were hurt because of the perception by Israelis that Obama, and I'm not going into the debate whether Israelis are right or wrong. I'm just telling you, giving you the facts. Israelis feel that Obama is not a supportive enough president on Israeli matters.
And they're
Shmuel,
usually
yeah.
very critical of American Jews. So how come they vote for him
I was
in
going to
such
say,
huge
are they
numbers?
mystified? Shmuel, are they mystified that we voted
They
as a
are
community?
they are somewhat mystified by the fact that American Jews vote for him in such great numbers. They understand that American Jews have other considerations as well. They would like American Jews to put Israel higher on their list of priorities when they go to the polls. And again, they don't quite get the Obama mistake. Didn't quite translate itself.
Didn't penetrate
to
into
Hebrew.
Israeli society. This gentleman here, please. Last question.
Except toward the end, we didn't mention the elephant in the room, which is Islamic terrorism. We have a common enemy on both sides of the ocean, which is Islamic terrorism. What happens in Israel affects us here in the United States. I happen to come from Orange County, where we have UCI passes divestiture. They have an annual MSU hate week. The Muslim students are encyclopedic
Okay, but
on every single.
okay, but can I ask you? We have to limit it to questions. So I need a
on every
question.
single roadblock.
Is there a question or no?
So I think that bears some discussion, is that we have a common enemy that.
Okay.
should unite us.
Does that is that in fact the case? I mean, does that play into the relationship? Do American Jews and Israeli Jews see that they have a common enemy, and does it affect the relationship?
Look, when I have this presentation with which I go to different Israeli places where I'm asked to speak about the relations between Israelis and Jewish Americans, and one of the slides is a slide of a poll taken, well, two polls actually taken at about the same week in America and in Israel about the war in Iraq. It was 2004. 75% of American Jews were already opposing the war in Iraq. Israeli opinion was identical to the opinion of Mormon Americans. About 80% of Jewish Israelis supported the war in Iraq, while about the same percentage of Jewish Americans opposed it. So I don't see how or where Jewish Americans and Jewish Israelis see a common enemy, and I don't see how I don't see that they share a vision as to how this enemy should be dealt with.
Okay.
Can I just
All right,
say-
JJ, I'll give you the last word, and then we'll
All right,
conclude the program.
American Jewish, we're talking about non-Orthodox Israelis and non-Orthodox Americans, because the Orthodox communities are really one community. American Jewish, non-Orthodox Jews, which is generally overlaps with American Jewish liberals, have a real problem with guns. They tend to believe that all problems are solvable, that you can talk and reason and understand each other. And in understanding and appreciating Israel's dilemma, American Jews they come in on crutches. They don't understand the reality of life in the Middle East, and they live in what, to many Israelis, to the extent that they think about it, is a kind of a dream world. The belief in multiculturalism, the opposition to Islamophobia, all of these things. Pardon?
Okay, well,
But I'm saying it's a very different way, as Shmuel said, and I think it starts with American Jews still being stuck in, the Kumbaya experience of the 60s and the Vietnam War.
the Institute on American Jewish-Israeli Relations, besides having discussions like this about actually the relationship between American Jews and Israeli Jews, as we go forward over the next several years, our intention is to try to create more programs, first of all, to help American Jews understand Israeli society better, and perhaps not in some of the more mythological ways that we've done it, but through a whole variety of things, culture, education. And then also in time, and funding willing, also to bring Israelis to the United States to be able to understand, as you've heard some of the initial attempts, and the impact that it can have, having Israelis visit here, but not visiting here just as tourists, but visiting here as people who begin to experience American Judaism, and hopefully to increase the bonds. I want to thank you all for coming here this evening, and I especially want to thank our panel.